Hello, welcome everybody to With Thunder's Applause podcast, a podcast where two friends get together to discuss the events and ideas that will shape our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co-host, Zach. What is up?
Not a mucho, just getting over some sickness. Spent a
Yeah.
good portion of the day on the couch. Feeling a little
I've
better.
been also I almost took a COVID test earlier because I'm like, why am I so fucking tired?
Yeah, I
I'm
had
just tired.
congestion and tired.
Yeah, I was a little congested too. I usually blame this mid-season shit on fucking Fukushima.
Sure. I mean, hey, you got to blame it on something. So it's either Fukushima or the rain.
Yeah, it was a little windy yesterday afternoon too, but it's also could be the medication I'm on, right? Makes you drowsy is one of the side effects.
Mm.
At any rate, um, I like your background. It's appropriate considering Anakin and Shmi Skywalker were trafficked. And we are going to talk about human trafficking,
Yeah.
not just for the Hutts. Um, and so we kind of have a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to try and get through it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to look into this issue. A big part of it is that the state of California is discussing legislation. I didn't pull
Yeah.
anything on California, but I've just heard in the news that they were discussing. I heard that they decided they weren't going to really pursue new legislation on it. And that's making, of course, people outraged because they think the government needs to expand the surveillance state or whatever to
Right. It's
deal
already
with
illegal.
a problem that's already on the books illegal, and they already
Yeah.
spend considerable resources attempting to address.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, it's been in the news there, and then also this movie that came out. I guess some actor who's like really gung ho for Jesus, and has a big following in the cultural right, acted in this movie called Sound of Freedom about
Yeah.
someone who rescues kids. I guess it's based on a true story or some shit.
Hmm.
Um, I haven't really had a desire to see it, but I just keep seeing headlines that it sounds like it's just been folded into the culture war stuff.
Yeah.
Um, 'Cause it's like, oh, do you think the fucking radical left wing is suppressing this movie because it upsets their agenda to kidnap and rape kids or whatever, some kind of absurd fucking thing that gets said.
Yeah. It's like you don't
Anyway,
have to, suppress a movie if it's not very good or it's, depressing. Like people will suppress it for you by just not wanting to watch it.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was just manufactured opposition, which
Yeah.
then drove views to the theater
Right.
because it did make a lot of money.
Sure.
Um, I think it was number 2 at the weekend box office last week, some shit like that,
All right.
which is something, especially for kind of a low budget. What I assume is a somewhat low budget kind of drama film. Um, but at any rate, so I'd been thinking about trafficking and I wanted to know more about it. Like, is it really a problem, or is it something that's being used to whip certain people into an unthinking frenzy to politically manipulate them? Um,
Right. Anytime, as we talked about on Thursday, anytime you talk about the children, it's a really good way to get, a certain subsect of people really, really involved.
yeah, and so I'm sure we may upset some people, but we're just gonna, and we cannot begin to grasp this issue fully. We try and approach it with a high degree of sensitivity,
Mhm.
because people are passionate about it and because it does happen and it's fucking horrific, as we'll see.
Yeah.
But we are going to present some numbers and attempt to have a nuanced conversation for really understanding how prevalent this is. And as a father of 2 young girls, one approaching her, whatever you call it, preteens or whatever, she'll be 10 soon.
Mhm.
Like, I'm trying to look at this as a father as well, um, and see how much emotional effort I should put into this.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll offer my opinion again at the end, but so far it's just yeah, this shit has happened forever.
Yeah.
And it's not any more common now than it was before. Certainly not, for, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, suburban, whatever, teenagers or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
And again, that does happen,
It
but
does
it's
happen.
exceedingly rare.
But it is rare. So we're going to start off with a Joe Rogan clip, because why not?
Yeah. And I immediately like this. What's going on with child trafficking, and why doesn't it get news coverage? It does. It's lots of it. I don't know what you want.
Unironically, I mean, that's a title. It's going to grab attention. It's not necessarily having to be related. They do talk. I think we left it off this clip, but this clip starts with him complaining that, like, I saw 10 different newspapers or websites, major websites, with the same or similar articles about how Ellen DeGeneres treats her staff.
Yeah.
But I didn't see anything on this. And of course, they pull up an article easily, but he's just saying that it's not front and center in the media. So anyway, let's roll this clip.
Yeah.
So when you read an article like that, U.S. Marshals rescued 72 missing children, this is where, like, all the QAnon people get crazy, because they think that Donald Trump is secretly working behind the scenes to stop child trafficking, and that there's like some secret cabal in the government that wants to enable this shit, right. And then Facebook bans QAnon, and everyone's going crazy now. Yeah. Like this child trafficking thing is real. It has always existed.
Did you know that Houston is actually one of the hubs for child trafficking in the U.S.?
Yeah, stop it there.
It's a big city. Of course it is.
It is, and it's a city that's well positioned as far as
near a border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, near the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of that stuff comes in on boats and stuff.
Yeah.
At any rate, it was kind of interesting in the sense that that guy was just like, oh, by the way, and it kind of, the way that Joe Rogan does his show, it completely derailed him. But it sounded like he was preparing to say, like, because the guy's like, oh, it's real. And he's like, yeah, it's real. And then the guy's like, it happens in Houston. And then they totally went off. But it sounded like Joe Rogan was getting prepared to be like, it's not, as prevalent or as big of a deal as it's made out to be.
Yeah.
Especially since it is associated with fucking QAnon, and people did genuinely believe like Donald Trump was like sent by like higher powers to like uncover this, which of course he didn't, because of course he's participated in it. Yeah. And you knew he did before you decided to elect him too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he may have been talking about adult women, but anybody that kind of, and I'm not particularly disgusted by it. But like, the grab him by the pussy thing or anything like that. It's like,
right.
If he's talking about adult women like that, and he's, whatever, he's going to probably talk about your 16-year-old daughter like that if he meets her criteria. Like, he's a fucking creep is my point.
Right.
And creeps generally don't discriminate.
He creeping on his own daughter, so yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reminding me. That's kind of gross. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not her father, so I can think whatever I want about her. At any rate, then so he did bring up this kind of thing that's happening with it kind of becoming a big deal. You social media spreading it anyway, of all the things that came with COVID and people protesting at school board meetings against masks and lockdowns and extra procedures and all this. One of the things that's been coming up at school board meetings is this fear of human trafficking. So here's just a clip of what I tried to find some caricature, right, of some right-wing person being hysterical and breaking down and crying. And then I was like, you know what? This just is a lady who's using her public comment time to talk about this issue
in a calm manner.
In a very calm manner, but there are some insights we can glean from it. So let's play that.
Because every decent human being should be outraged that the most heinous predator criminals are stalking children 10 to 16 years of age to lure, capture, control, exploit, and sell them as slaves. 79% of human trafficking is sexual exploitation.
And I did verify that number.
It is 70 something
Yes, yeah, 79%.
globally.
Globally, yeah.
Okay, not of 10 to 16-year-olds.
No, not specifically of 10 to 16-year-olds, but yeah, just overall.
Predominantly women and girls. 20% of all trafficked victims are children. Even pretending to love and care for someone is enough to lure them into being a victim. The victim is manipulated or forced to engage in sex acts for someone else's economic gain. They work in massage parlors, brothels, strip clubs, major sporting events, truck stops, street.
That's the one that got me. Major sporting events. I would be a terrible pimp. It didn't even occur to me.
But like, you ever been at a bar or whatever, and then there's like the scantily clad, good-looking woman who's like representing the alcohol brand and trying to get people to drink the alcohol?
Yeah.
I imagine that it's that kind of thing, generally speaking. And with sporting events, it could be just people hawking merchandise or whatever.
Yeah.
But still being their bodies are being used to market.
Yeah.
Rather than them being directly used for gratification or whatever.
Okay.
So there's a lot of ways, and she had mentioned it kind of almost glossed over it, which is the real concern for me as a parent. And also, I think as we'll go through the data, is one of the many common ways that human trafficking happens, that it's not actually just, like she said at the beginning, people snatching them off the street and putting them into slavery. It's actually that teenage girl who has not got a lot of attention. Her parents are not really in her life in a meaningful way. She doesn't have meaningful relationships with friends or teachers or whatever. And so she's kind of lost in a way. And then that older guy, it's like, oh, you're so beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And she falls in love with him. And then he manipulates her to engage in sex work.
Yeah.
And that actually, in my trying to wrap my head around this for this show, of course, we're going to have a lot more stuff than what we cover here in the show notes. And highly encourage folks to go through the resources and to think about this issue critically and come to their own conclusion about what it is and what it means for our society and what kinds of courses of action we should take to address it, if any. But I thought that was interesting that she brought that one up, because that does come up a lot and would probably be the most common way for like pretty suburban white girl to wind up in that situation.
Yeah, and that was what I kind of garnered from reading through things is most of the time when it is, a more well-to-do person, it is either what you're saying or even a family member or a friend.
Yeah.
Prostitution and escort services. They are rented 10 to 45 times a night.
Students, it can affect anybody from elementary school to high school. And it's not like the kids that you see, like you don't think that smuggling kids are being brought across the border and they're being trafficked. It's could be my daughter, it could be your daughter, it could be your grandchild. It's the
You want to
person
pause there?
that takes a picture.
Yeah.
She said it's not like we just think that it's happening there, but it's actually happening in our own communities, which is true. But that statement really bothers me, especially by a law enforcement person, considering, like, statistically speaking, as we'll get into, the vast majority of it is poor Black and brown people.
Yes.
And white people too. I've watched documentaries on of Eastern European women being sex trafficked and stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, anywhere where there's desperation or disaster or anything like that, it's really easy.
Yeah, and I don't know where this is. They sound like Southern accents. I couldn't identify. It says the town of Georgetown.
Yeah.
I couldn't identify where Georgetown was. I thought GAB meant Georgetown, Alberta, and there is a Georgetown, Alberta, but they sound like they might be from the South and not from Canada.
Well, I think that Horry County.
Oh, there you go. Look at you, open source intelligence bastard.
Yeah. South Carolina.
Oh, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And
All right, thanks,
sends it to
Georgetown, South
someone
Carolina.
thinking that they can trust them. That person then in turns blackmails them. And that child, that girl, that teenage girl will do anything for that picture not to get out to someone else. Then that turns into threats, because then they make her do something else. Then that turns into beatings. There's so many, through our trainings, what we've learned, there's so many children that are being trafficked just inside their home. They live in their home with their parents, and their parents have no idea. So when
Yeah.
we
And
That
then it
was
also,
the point I was getting at about
Yeah.
the boyfriend thing. Go ahead,
Oh,
sorry.
I was going to say it also doesn't help that in a lot of families, for girls especially, your entire worth is determined by your virginity. If you lose that, you're worthless. So you don't want to tell anybody anything. And then you get the mindset, where you're just going to keep it a secret.
Yeah, there was a lot of that tension, huh? I mean, it wasn't really as big of a deal when I was in high school, but I think there was always whispers of, oh, did you hear so-and-so
Yeah.
sucked off so-and-so in the back of the bus or whatever? And
Yeah.
it was stigmatizing, oh, she's a slut. When in reality, and then when the guys are like, oh, dude, I got my dick sucked on the back of the bus, and everybody's like, yeah, dude. And he's like, well, there's got to be some female that's participating in it. So you can't, you know what I mean?
Just a bunch of guys sucking each other off. Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, that would have been probably the better way to do it. Then they would have never gone to school, probably.
Damn it.
All right. And so this is
Solemnity.
happening in state houses and as well as in county school board meetings or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so here's just a quick article about it dominating politics in Iowa. Like I said, there's legislation in California. And the subheadline here is conspiracy theories have been building for years. Of course they have, right?
Yeah.
What was the original one? Pizzagate?
Pizzagate, and then
Can you
birds aren't real.
explain that? Because was it they thought it was there was a sex dungeon under a pizza place in New York or something? And that was Alex Jones that said that shit, right?
Yeah, I forget where it was, but basically oh, it's happening, in the basement, and somebody went into the pizza place and basically was like, show me where the children are, and they're like, I know they're in the basement. We don't have a basement. Like, yes, you do. I'm a minimum wage employee. Where's your manager? This is a bad day. Yeah, and
so he came in armed, right?
Yeah, and it ended up being nothing, and no point did it occur to him maybe I should call the police. No, I should take it into my own hands, because even amongst conspiracy theories, you don't trust the police. They're part of the establishment. So you got to do it on your own. But yeah, that was basically it. There was just a made up story that somebody fell for. I mean, a lot of people did, but one guy in particular fell for very hard.
Right.
Got in trouble for it.
You had mentioned when we did a show on QAnon way back in the golden years of this show, over a year ago now.
Yeah.
When our quality was, we should do a fucking side by side, because that would be crazy.
I have been posting some of them onto podcasts, and I have to look at the video, make sure it's all good, and then put it up. It was bad.
It worked though, and we kept doing it, and that's what we needed to do, is just start and keep doing it.
Yeah.
At any rate, we talked about QAnon and that, and we were talking about your brother, I think, and he was one of those people who didn't you say that, or maybe I'm confusing two things? You said that part of the reason he was leaving California is because they didn't take his children's safety seriously.
No, he said he said California was too liberal, so he moved to Florida. Which, I mean, hey, good call. If you think California is too liberal, that's definitely opposite coast, opposite ideology. But yeah, he was worried about his children being trafficked and all that. I'm like, first of all, you have 2 boys right now. He's got a girl now.
Statistically speaking, not impossible.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, very unlikely.
Less likely. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But still happens. But yeah, he was worried about that. I mean, I got a sister who's got kids. I think just when you have kids, you worry about shit. And
and I think of things like the story of like the boy bands. Did you ever hear about I guess there was a documentary recently, but apparently all the competing boy bands were all managed by the same fucking dude who would literally just do casting calls and get these guys together and then like do the production and make, like, he created them out of thin air.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
there's
I mean, I know.
which is why you're like, oh, there's not a ton of talent in the whole group. They might have one or two people that are kind of talented, like NSYNC or whatever had Justin Timberlake, who obviously is very talented.
There's a great South Park episode about boy bands. It's very accurate.
Oh, right.
You just need 5, and they have to fill certain roles. And a lot of the boy bands, like, there is no real bad boy, but you dress him up in leather, and suddenly he's a bad boy.
Yeah, but my point is that like that, and I also see athletics in some way. When there's like a poor kid from whatever the ghetto, and like big college recruiters are coming and being like, hey, we'll offer you all these incentives, blah blah blah, and he's looking at having a pro career and getting endorsement deals and all that. What is that except selling your body?
Right.
And these are grown men approaching children to go sell their bodies for the next 15 years until their body gets used up, and then they get thrown away. And hopefully when they get thrown away, they have something to live on or some other kind of plan B, whether it's going into coaching or whatever. Writing a book or whatever.
Sports news anchor, whatever.
Precisely. There you go. But anyway, like, it just occurs to me that, like, in a way, that's also, if you have grown men coming to talk to children at high schools for athletic recruiting, that is trafficking in a way. I mean, it's obviously above ground, so maybe that's why it's not trafficking.
Unless you're Sandusky.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But it's the same thing essentially.
Yeah.
Hey, come play on my college team when you're still a minor.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of like, oh, it's sex, so it's different. And it's like, it's not really. Like, I mean, if I go into an office and sell my life for $20 an hour, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm not pulling in money. I'm selling my life.
Yeah.
Everybody think about it that way for a while, and you might rethink what you're doing with your life.
Yeah, and we're not trying to imply that those are identical, but there are definite parallels between them, which should call into question the entire reality of our economic system. And again, as we go into the data here in just a second, you find that most people that are children, but again, it's only 20%.
Yeah.
That's a fairly accurate figure based on what I saw what that woman said. 20%.
I've actually got a really good quote for later on, where a woman who was trafficked gets really close to like realizing the true problem that leads to all this.
Okay, great.
Stop short. Yeah.
Point out when we get there, but it's like not all children. It's actually a minority of trafficked individuals are children, and of that population of trafficked children, even fewer than that are engaged in sex work or whatever. And so and as we'll get into, the whole kind of idea of minors and trafficking is a little screwy anyway, just based on how they define it. So I did just want to do a couple, just read a couple highlights from here. Specifically this pop out quote: trafficking is real, but it is rarer and takes a different form than most fervent advocates portray. Which I think is that's the summary. That should have been the episode title, honestly.
Trafficking is real, but rarer and takes different. That's too long. I can't do that.
But it's rarer and takes a different form than most fervent advocates portray. Again, we were just talking about other kinds of, this almost seems like a form of trafficking. If grown men come to a high school to talk to minors about using their body to make other people money,
starting to sound pretty familiar. Yeah.
It sounds like this kind of tendency for capitalism to look for anything it can exploit to make money, including minors, is just part and parcel. It's a characteristic of the economic system we're in.
Yeah, and places like Wisconsin are now letting 14-year-olds work again.
Oh yeah, exactly. I didn't even put that clip. There was somebody, someone who owned multiple McDonald's in Pennsylvania a few months ago, got hit with like 150 different labor violations for all of them related to minors working more than is federally allowed, being lied about their schedules, them allowing them to work even though they knew it was illegal, like exceed a certain amount of work on school nights, and like all these. So it was like 150 violations. That's also fucking exploiting child labor. And so really the line that the most fervent advocates portray, which is different than the actual reality of this, is that the only exploitation that's happening and that we concern ourselves with is the rarest, least common form of like minor sex trafficking of minors.
Right.
So at any rate, there's not a whole lot there I needed to go through. If you had a paragraph or two that you thought you needed to say, I just mostly wanted to point out that like it is a bit of a moral panic. It's real, but it's also a bit of a moral panic because it's closing political the halls of political discourse to be able to do the work of governing, because it's drawing their attention to something that realistically I don't even think we have any preparations for it, but like, and I haven't thought too deeply about it yet, but I just in my cursory examination of the problem and the actual reality of the problem, I don't see how we could really do any more than we're doing, except maybe expanding training for law enforcement, for teachers, for even other various government employees, like a health inspector or a building code inspector, or train profession. So the electricians and the plumbers, so that like you're like, hey, when you're out, these are the things you look for. Notify us if you see these things.
Right.
Beyond educating people how to identify it, I do not see a legislative fix to this that
legalize prostitution.
Maybe
that's a huge one.
But you're still going to want to prevent minors from doing it.
Well, yeah, but like I guess the point is that one of the articles I was reading basically said that the people who are closest to trafficked people are often other independent sex workers, and if they had the ability to go to the police without worry of getting in trouble themselves, they could say, there is this kid, I'm pretty sure she's being trafficked, she's right here.
Maybe some kind of blanket immunity,
right? Something like that.
Sex workers who come forward with information regarding trafficking minors. I think that could work too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
or just legalization.
Because you're right. And on some of the documentaries I watched were like, how did you get by as a 16-year-old sex worker or whatever? And they're like, other women on the street fucking look out for you, man. Like it's just like a code. And how do you operate? Like, how did you get away from that abusive pimp or whatever? And it's like, I had fucking support. I had someone who's like, you can sleep on my fucking couch.
Right. As long as
that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is absolutely a thing.
Solidarity.
People help. Fucking seriously though, people help each other. Like people help each other, when you're in a similar situation. Because for a lot of people, the mindset is, I would want this help if I were in that situation, so I will provide that help for someone in that situation. And like, that's what anyone like coming out of kindergarten, would be like. Of course, you help people. How about it gets beaten out of you, as you get older, and so people like don't actually believe that sort of mentality exists. And it's like, no, it does. And usually it's amongst the most disadvantaged, because they're the ones that need that support network. They don't have it otherwise.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, you have we have some statistics.
I love numbers.
Yeah, man. So this is from the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
Yeah.
Which is set up to help facilitate this information transfer. We were kind of talking about if we gave other adult sex workers immunity or some kind of mechanism for them to report without like also implicating themselves in
Right.
what's still illegal.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the exact case, but it was a woman got charged for basically reporting herself as being trafficked, and she got charged with prostitution, even though she was the one being forced into prostitution.
Yeah,
And so, like, the law is not nice to, mostly women having sex for money.
Yeah, I had I was watching a short documentary on minors, some private investigators that were investigating in Houston, actually, because I looked it up as in Houston after that Joe Rogan clip. Anyway, they were like investigating, and yeah, like some of the minors they were trying to find, they came up in the system because they got in trouble for like stealing a car or stealing from a store or something. And they just kind of were remarking like it's sad that a lot of these they just get caught up in that, and then that's kind of normal in that life, and now they have a criminal record. So it just like, even though you're trying to like get them out of being a sex worker or whatever, like they're basically like, the way the law looks at them and says, we don't really care about that, we just care that you stole some shit from Walmart.
Right.
And now like they're even forced deeper into continuing to do that because it makes it difficult to get other jobs and stuff like that.
Yep.
And when in fact they're victims, the reason they're doing those behaviors is because they've been in this position where they've been exploited for years and don't have a support network. Yeah. Anyway, let's just look at a couple numbers. We're including all this in the description, so you can check it out.
You check it out for your state. We did California. Let's see. Just in 2021, they got 5,257.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll just signals to the hotline, and then I'm sure there's a lot of people that like hang up after a while. Someone comes in the room and they're like, "Oh fuck." So nearly 2,000 were actually
Distinct.
Yeah, distinct and received, and they were able to talk. This is an interesting button right here. This is a really cool button that more websites in general should have. If you click on this button, it takes you out of here to your browser's basic search engine, and it erases it from the history.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a powerful button. It's really cool. Because I did that. I was just like, "Huh, the hell's quick exit? Oh, well, let me just go back to the history," because I forgot what I was looking at. And I was like, "Let me go back to the history. Oh, it's gone. Oh, that's cool.
That's great. It's so that people can look at it without other
fear,
people
basically.
knowing that they were sending in a tip or whatever."
Exactly. Or you are yourself being trafficked. You're on here. Someone comes in the room. You got to get done with this quick. You don't have time to clear history or whatever. You just boom, hit that button. Good to go.
That's rad. Very cool.
Yeah.
Let's go. So then they have Signal and Hotline.
Yep.
Hotline was found by referral. So again, that's probably other sex workers talking.
Yep.
And then they got calls and text messages, online reports, emails, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Let's see cases identified in 2021.
Yeah. So 1,334
cases of 2,122 victims. They have to tell you that cases can involve multiple victims, even though clearly there's only one way to
get a larger
difference in numbers.
yeah. It doesn't work otherwise.
Okay, so of those 2,100 cases, slightly less than half were sex trafficking.
Yeah.
Or I guess right around half if you count sex and labor.
Yeah.
Venue for trafficking.
Ooh.
So for labor trafficking, it was domestic work, agriculture, peddling.
So like selling
peddling
chickens or whatever.
Oh, like selling fucking knockoff fucking Louis Vuittons and shit.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Peddling ring, construction, illicit activity, begging ring. Interesting. And then on and on and on, including everything, right? But agricultural work and domestic work, which is, we were discussing last night on the phone. I've heard that too, of the kind of people, more affluent, who tended to gravitate towards that kind of hysteria at the school board meetings and shit.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are like, oh, well, it's my domestic worker, and to make sure she doesn't steal my jewelry, I took her passport.
Yeah.
They were like, that makes you a fucking human trafficker.
Yeah. Well, and you have to understand that these people barely even recognize like poor people the same color as them as being human. Now you make it someone who's a different skin color, and they're like,
yeah, and they just don't even consider, they're unaware of what it is. It's just a caricature of what they think the problem is, right?
Yeah.
It's my pretty little daughter's gonna get kidnapped by some black guy and put on the street as a hoe. Like, no, dude, that's not really how it works.
Yeah.
More likely, you're taking your nanny or your house cleaner's fucking passport is trafficking.
Yeah.
And then let's see, for venues for sex trafficking, massages, hotel, motel based. One of the documentaries of Eastern European women I saw, they actually, there was a hotel with several women. They lived in the motel room, and then guys came in, and it was in Canada. They got trafficked to Vancouver.
Oh.
Yeah, it was interesting. Pornography, residence-based commercial sex, street-based, online ad venue escorts, hostess or strip club. I heard one story in that documentary of a woman being trafficked into being a stripper. Which just like I know people who have been dancers, and that's maybe another really good place. You're like, okay, cool. You go to the porn industry, you go to nonprofits that like provide STD testing or other support services for sex workers, and you go to bars or clubs or exotic dancer clubs or whatever, and you train the staff who are not trafficked, who are engaged in that activity of their own choice, and you teach them how to identify it so we can snuff that shit out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they want to, because they already, like, I know the people who voluntarily done it, they don't feel great doing it. They're just like, it's fucking really good money.
Yeah.
Or it can be, right?
Yep.
And some of them are pretty proud of it. They're like, I'm good at what I do. I get paid well, like whatever, they have a sense of pride in their work. But generally speaking, they recognize the industry as inherently exploitative, just based on its nature. And I have zero doubts that people would gladly take training to identify if training materials were produced by government agencies and presented and said, we really would like your or even mandated, because they're required to put all of the stuff. And I think they might actually have sex trafficking stuff that's required to go on work boards now.
I mean, we've got all kinds of regulations already for everything else.
You have to put a wage schedule. You have to tell people that they're allowed to take X amount of minutes of break every day.
Like banks have to do training every year on regulations for every personnel, and it's paid. So like, you could have all the strippers sit down for like an hour, every year, and just get training on it. Or, when you're hired or whatever.
Even in air traffic control, we had to do human trafficking training, and that
makes a lot of sense.
Code word, I think it's Blue Lightning. I might have mentioned this before. And it's in our document that guides what we do, and it's a small paragraph because there's not a lot to it, but it just has like the national number to contact in this event, and then you're supposed to use that phrase in all communications to speed communications moving through. This is so-and-so at such and such a facility, Blue Lightning, blah, blah, blah. And then they can connect you to the right people, and then open up channels with local law enforcement to deal with it. And so they trained us to do that, and we never had to do it, but I sure as shit, I mean, there's not a lot to do sometimes. So I just scan the fucking, whoa, what's that jet? I haven't seen a jet like that before. You look down, is it one dude with like a bunch of young, beautiful females? Like, nope. It's just a bunch of old fat people on a Kohler jet coming to sell fucking sink parts or whatever, At any rate, so any more stuff here?
Nothing too important. Just as a breakdown: adults versus minors, females versus males, gender, or non-binary, etc.
Yeah.
then-
So go back, U.S. foreign nationals. So it's about 50-50
yeah,
of their cases, and also, but many, many more adults than children.
yeah. Well, and the thing we need to realize is like when you're saying like, oh, this only happens in economically depressed places. We're an economically depressed place in a lot of the U.S. Like,
Yeah.
we're not, that great. Like, we still have a whole lot of people in desperate, needs. You have a hurricane come through. How easy is it, for your kid to just disappear, or a young woman to just disappear,
fall in with a fucking shitty boyfriend.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that movie? Oh God, the heroin movie. Why is it slipping my
Train
mind?
Spotting?
No, the other one. Where the mom was on diet pills and God, what the fuck was the name of that movie? It had a kind of longer title. I want to say like a phrase or something. Yeah, anyway, there was a movie about heroin, and the guy there can't figure out another way to get their fix, so he winds up like basically convincing her to sleep with some rich guy, so that they could get paid. And that's essentially that adult trafficking female U.S. citizen. Because I mean, if she's kind of being compelled to do it, her boyfriend's like, "You got to do this." And if I remember the movie correctly, it's been a while. She didn't really want to do it, and he's just like, "We need this," and so she did it. And that would qualify. So anyway, just really kind of looking at it. No, it's not as many minors as you think, because the way they talk is like there's tens of thousands of young children disappearing every year. And I'm like, if it was tens of thousands, like it would be abundantly clear to everybody. It's not tens of thousands.
I mean, hundreds of thousands of people died from COVID and we barely noticed. So,
okay, so then moving on to a Fox News clip.
Where they say the opposite. More than half of trafficking victims were minors. Who's right? Who's wrong?
Are you going to press play?
Oh, sorry. I didn't know it was for the video.
Oh, I didn't either.
Fastest growing criminal enterprises in the world. And people will do anything to protect what they consider their property.
A joint task force operation.
There we go. Nope. That. Wire.
Oh, it's an hour? You don't want to watch
rescuing
an hour.
70 missing
That's 3 minutes,
children
30 seconds.
victimized by sex traffickers. My next guest is fighting to end the exploitation of children. Here to talk about it is Tim Ballard, founder and president of Operation Underground Railroad. Thank you so much for the service you do.
I was reading something about this guy.
He's making the rounds. I saw Jordan Peterson pop up.
Well, he's basically making millions because donations to his organization have like gone from like 9 million to almost 30 million in a matter of like 3 years. And they claim to be involved with stuff, but then when you ask the police are like, we didn't have any help from them. I don't know what you're talking about.
You are doing just
they love their
exhausting
fucking
work,
grifters,
and it's so
bro.
sad the number of children that you guys are rescuing. Your operation found 70 missing children. We just reported, right? That was just
it was this in particular.
Span.
The police
and
are
kids
like,
are
I don't know
between
this
the
guy.
ages of 10 and 17, and I understand many of them are runaways. But how are these kids tracked and then trafficked, and then how do you find them?
Yeah, first, kudos to Homeland Security's investigation, who that's the agency I came from. Amazing work. And these guys understand how to find these kids because they understand how traffickers think. Traffickers are like businessmen. So oftentimes we look at trafficking like the movie Taken. We think it's some cold, hard
checks with my
rape and
documentaries
kidnapping
I've
in the
watched
night.
too.
And
It is a
that's
business.
generally not what
Oh,
it
yeah.
is. Traffickers, like businessmen, are looking for kind of the easier route to get them. They lure them. And most importantly, they look for vulnerability. Anytime there's a big war,
They're looking
for example,
for the
we're in
fucked up
Ukraine
ones.
right now, and we are hunting for thousands of missing.
Well, and then he was saying, like if there's a big destabilizing war, or the articles I read, or if there's a natural disaster, it's an opportune time to swoop in and grab as many people as you can because the government's distracted.
Yeah, and sometimes it is like I had no idea I was being trafficked. One documentary I watched, or one of the documentaries I watched, had a woman who was married, she left with a guy because they were like taking over his mom's store, and she was going to Turkey to buy stuff to put in their store for them to sell. And she went with him, and then he called her husband and was like, by the way, I sold your wife for $2,000 or whatever, because she already had a child, and so she didn't get as much money. And then he spent forever basically harassing the people who bought her, who were business people who did that regularly, just kept bothering them and causing them so much problem they let her go.
Oh. So basically pulled a Karen, talked to the manager until they got what he
Kind
wanted.
of in a roundabout way. He's pretty pissed, you know, obviously.
I mean,
really
obviously, yeah.
Back and so that worked in that case because they are businessmen, and he's just like, we just made it really, like, I just wouldn't let them be to where, and he's like, I'll buy her back, whatever it takes, blah, blah, blah. And they're finally just like, fuck it. We're going to cut our losses. We've probably already made our money back off you. Get the fuck out.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Likely trafficked women and children. We've rescued dozens and dozens of kids who were made trafficking victims after the big earthquake in 2010. Why? Because traffickers prey on chaos. And that chaos can be on an individual level with one of these runaways. About 1 in 6, believe it or not, of runaways in the United States end up being sex trafficked. And that's largely who HSI was able to locate and rescue.
Pause there.
Just these very vulnerable people. They're looking.
I think that's enough there.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it said 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 were runaways.
Yeah.
Or no, it was more than that as runaways. 1 in 5 runaways.
Yeah, I think it's 1 in 5. And I mean, that's the perfect person to be trafficked. Like, they've already cut ties with anyone who would support them.
Right. And so one of the things I wanted to draw attention to is how we're defining trafficking. And so I think our next article actually goes a little bit more in depth, I think, with more numbers. It's because anybody that's under the age of 18 that is engaging in sex work is considered a trafficked individual. So when you're like 1 in 6 runaways, the majority are runaways of trafficked, right? Because also the way we define traffic is if a parent takes a child that the court says you're not allowed to take the child out of state, you know, for whatever reason, because of a custody agreement, and you take the child out of state, you are trafficking, even though it's your child. And one of the things that I think it might be this national study, we're going to just kind of glance over. It might be somewhere in this national study where they straight up say, oh, no, I'm sorry. It's in the last article we're going to go to. But at one point it says, you know, when the police approached in this presumably missing child / trafficking case, the children didn't want to go with the cops. They're like, no, I'm with my parent. I don't want to leave. But the other parent was mad that they left, but the kids are like happy they are where they are. And it says the cops kind of asked questions that could not determine that there was anything nefarious happening. It was literally just a parent with their kids. The other parent was mad. For whatever reason. And if the child's like, no, I want to stay with dad. Mom is batshit crazy. Like that could be a trafficking case.
Yeah.
Even though it's like not in the way that people portray it.
Right. That's just illegally taking a minor across state borders. Yeah.
It's legally trafficking, but is it what you are? Is it the thing that you're fucking panicking about? No,
right.
It's not. Additionally, like, if there are minors engaged in sex work, it is trafficking. And so of course runaways are going to engage in sex work because like it's one thing they can do that they know that they can
low skill
because they can't go get a job at a regular place because they would need their parent to sign the work slip, right? So we already make it difficult for young people who leave home for whatever reason, whether it's not supportive, it's abusive, that family has rejected them for, you know, being gender non-binary or identifying as the other gender or whatever. Trans or whatever, or gay, and they get kicked out of the house.
Being atheist.
Or an atheist, or they get caught smoking pot. Dude, my parents fucking did all. I mean, they're not terrible human beings. But they made mistakes. They could have been tragic, but like, oh my God, you're like, we caught you making out with your girlfriend, you're 16 years old, that's not acceptable behavior. That could run somebody out if they really like their girlfriend, or if they're like, fuck you, I just want to get laid, or I just want to feel up her shirt or whatever. And the parent freaks out. My parents broke fucking CDs and shit because they didn't like the music we were listening to. There's all manner of confrontations that happen that could have led to someone leaving the house as a minor. And then what do you do? Okay, it's a female minor goes and works the street or gets a job at a strip club where she lies about her age and they don't really background check or whatever, right? And now she's being trafficked.
Whoops.
But not really.
Yeah.
Right?
She's trafficking herself.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but I mean, the whole thing with minors is they can't make decisions for themselves, so they can't decide to do that technically. Yeah,
which is why we need to educate club owners and other people. Let's just skip through this national study, youth involvement in the sex trade. This is specifically something I sought out. Center for what innovation?
Center for Court Innovation.
Court innovation. Okay, so related to the legal system and law enforcement.
Yeah.
And specifically, I sought this out because it's about youth.
This is just saying thanks for all the people involved.
Yep.
And then where did you want to go?
Findings from I think from youth interviews. So page 34. Site selection, they just said where they did the survey because they interviewed people. So there was a number of places they went in different cities to interview, and you should scroll and get to some data.
Here we go. Findings from youth interviews.
Yep. Organization of findings. Okay, scroll down. They're just basically saying all the questions they asked and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Their demographic characteristics of the sample. This is important.
That one. Yeah. Let's see here. We got all tables provide a breakdown for cis male, female, and trans females. Total also include a small number of trans males, aged 13 to 17 and 18 to 24.
They also include under 24 as youth. I want to point that out.
Yeah, which is an interesting choice.
Yeah,
I mean, they may have been doing it since before they were,
I think in most stats, like when it comes to like economic stats and all that other stuff, they count 24 and under as
interesting,
still in the category. I think 18 to 24, so like a young adult, but they tend to treat them distinct demographically from adults. Presumably, haven't really figured their shit out, so they're not going to have the same consumer habits as adults, etc., so forth.
Yeah, the wherewithal. Involvement with a pimp results pointed to a substantial array of differences in the market involvement experience and needs of interview participants who were and were not subject to coercion and control by a pimp. See definition below. And then other differences based on sexual orientation, race, and etc. And whether they had children.
So here's the numbers I wanted to.
Yes, go for it.
Can you scroll in just a bit?
Yep.
Sweet. So if you look at it, the vast majority of these are falling in they're not young kids. Right?
The
average age for cis female is 19.
Yeah.
Average age for trans females 21.
Yeah, and it doesn't really get up above 10% until you get to about 17.
Yeah, which is, it's still technically a minor, but it's not, oh, your poor little, 10-year-old got fucking abducted and trafficked.
Yeah.
So in the age category, the 18 to 24 is the vast majority, 84%.
Right.
And you can see here heterosexual, a lot of them, bisexual, also a lot of them, gay and other not so much. Most Black.
Yeah.
2/3 of them are Black.
Yeah.
And
gee, I wonder why that might be.
17-year-old Black girls hooking.
Yeah.
Because they ain't got no fucking other options.
Yeah, economically disadvantaged, not well educated, probably.
And broken family because of the legacy of African descendants of slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just, again, yet another category where we can see the clear disparity between black people and everybody, like black descendants of
Everyone
and everybody else.
Literally everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you're like, oh, and us here in South Carolina, us white people in South Carolina, really concerned, it could be your daughter. It could be your daughter. Probably not a lot of black people in that room. It didn't pan around. I don't want to be judgmental, but my guess, probably not a lot of black people in the room.
Yep. And so you're looking at a 12 to 14% chance.
Yeah, exactly. For 14 is males. That's cis male.
Yeah, yeah.
And cis females 12.
Yeah. So.
Okay, great. Living situation. Half of them live with their family.
Yeah.
Another and a third of them live with their friends.
Yep.
So some are homeless, some live alone.
Yeah.
Some have other, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But you know, so it's not even kids that are necessarily kicked out of the house. Like this is the 17-year-old still lives with her mom, but she's got to make money somehow, so she does what she knows how to do.
Yep.
Like, probably what her mom did when she was her age, realistically speaking. That's how that goes, intergenerational kind of patterns, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, there you go. Most of them still live with their families, so they're not abducting children.
Yeah, and if you look, most of them make it into high school too.
Yeah.
So it's not like, you know, people are like, oh yeah. I mean, that goes with being 17 years old too. So, but yeah, it's not like
and so
entirely uneducated people.
Most of them U.S. born, at least in the survey.
Right.
About one in I don't know, like almost 40% of cis females have kids.
Yeah.
So
of course
that's
they do.
also potentially had a kid at 15 or 16.
Yeah. And that'll get you kicked out of your house in a lot of. I mean, that'll get you kicked out of your family home in a lot of homes.
And provides a level of economic desperation that would force you into this when no other options are available.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. When you're the 17-year-old hooking and you have a 2-year-old or something at home. So when you first left home, I thought this was interesting because it was fairly well distributed.
Yeah.
Or this is for those who had left home. And so these are kids who either left home, lived with friends or relatives fairly about the time they're teenagers, which makes sense because some parents don't know how to manage that conflict, inevitable conflict. I'm hoping to cultivate a high degree of autonomy in my children, in their minds, so that we don't have those conflicts. Because I'm not going to approach you as my property. I think that's outdated. I'm not going to say, because I said so. I'm going to say, okay, you want to go out with your friends. I think that's a bad idea because of this, but I want you to know that you can call me if you need help or you need me to pick you up, you and your friends up or whatever.
Yeah.
And
there will be no judgment. I will come get you. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you just got to teach them, self-respect, value themselves and critical thinking.
Yeah. So anyway, like there's this is kind of fairly well distributed for males and females.
Yeah.
And it seems like, again, it's just probably just family problems that force them out in most cases.
Yeah.
Based on the age when they're leaving, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's what happens when you get to be near teenagers. You start to fight with your fucking parents.
This I thought was interesting. Age of first sexual experience.
Oh, yeah.
12 to 14.
Yeah.
God. I don't even think I was. No, I was probably thinking about sex by the time. I know I was by the time I was 14, but like that shit was still years to come.
Yeah. They don't even have my age in this.
It's fine.
Down here anywhere.
I would have been the 2%. Almost all of them had lost their virginity by the time they were 16. That's fucking crazy. But that makes a lot of sense too. Right? Yeah. That's indicative of, and I kind of I didn't sleep with her because I was younger, but I had a girlfriend who I think had a kid at 15 or 16. Yikes. A couple years after we split up because that's where she was. And her mom was like, not really, not really policing that or really in some ways encouraging it. Because that's how her mom figured out how to make it work, right? Like use the gifts you have. If you're good looking, put that to use.
Yeah. Capitalize on it. Boom.
Yep, exactly. All right, moving on.
Yep.
There is some stuff on pimps that I really, really, really wanted to get to.
Okay.
So just keep scrolling. I think it's down here.
Oh, gotcha. Still on here.
Yeah, my bad.
Oh, no worries. Oh, here we go. This one? Or is it more?
It might be in here. No, this is just them summarizing that fucking table.
Okay. Work environment.
Making and spending money.
Let's search for the word pimp and see what happens. Oh, God. Yeah, actually, that's probably where it is.
Pimps. No, go back to that paragraph. Pimps and market facilitators.
Pimps and market facilitator. Okay, cool.
Yeah, because there's a difference. A market facilitator is someone who does not control their money and often does not get paid. And I thought it was really interesting. I saw a market facilitator interviewed, and they're like, they do, I think, take a cut from the customer, but the negotiated price between the customer, they get a finder's fee, but they never interact with the negotiation between the John and the sex worker.
Nah, okay.
And so they're not like a pimp in the sense that they do not control. They kind of are like headhunters of sorts.
That's
where
a good
they
comparison.
Facilitate clients finding the laborer that they desire.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of an interesting relationship, because it's not, you could say, well, then you're engaged in helping these people sell their bodies, which is immoral. But really, they're like, no, I mean, in the interview I saw, it's like, no, we provide a degree of screening.
Yeah.
That they don't get if they're street walking. Like if they get a recommendation from us, there is at least a higher degree or a higher probability that person is not going to be a shitbag. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and one of the articles I was reading was about, I forget what the first one was called, but Sesta. And it was basically about how a lot of the women who were selling themselves online, as soon as that went into effect, they're like, great, now I got to go back on the street. I don't get to screen as much. I basically just have to look in the car and make an instant judgment. Yeah,
too. Yeah. And that's federal law, if I'm not mistaken.
It is federal law,
oriented towards stopping sex trafficking.
Yeah.
But ultimately what it did is, and I remember it distinctly being phrased this way by one of the sex work advocacy nonprofits, came forward and was like, this is literally forcing women who had liberated themselves from these exploitative coercion, control, or force of a pimp, and liberated themselves from that. And this is forcing them back. The market facilitator is like the better option. Obviously, working for yourself is better. Having your clients a market facilitator is probably next best, because it's not forceful in nature or controlling.
Right.
And so anyway, the prevalence of pimps, overall 15% of participants classified by researchers as working with a pimp, slightly higher than those who explicitly identified as obtaining customers from a pimp. 13% answered that they obtain customers from a pimp often or all the time.
Yep.
Scroll down a bit.
Yep. More than 4 in 10 of the 15% of study participants who had pimps in turn responded that the pimp had rules. Rules included a percentage of earning between 15 and 100% given to the pimp each day, a quota to stop working for the day, beatings for non-compliance, money up front, rules about drug use, time limits, not allowed to have actual romantic partners, and not allowed to leave home after certain hours.
They don't want them working when they can't collect, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so what I thought was interesting is how few actually youth have pimps.
Right.
It was, what was it?
It was 15%. So.
No, that's the study participants said the pimp had rules.
No. It's also 15%.
Okay, so 15%
as classified as working
of youth. Yeah. How many of the minor youth have a pimp?
Oh, I don't know.
Keep scrolling.
We have to scroll back up. Customers from a pimp. never, rarely. So like 11%. Yeah. Oh, here we go.
There you go. Referrals. That's it.
Yeah. So 4% from pimp. So not much.
For cis males,
Yeah,
females,
and 13. Yeah, yeah. So
yeah. And
similar
so
numbers.
not a lot, right?
Yeah.
Also, like referrals. So that's websites that have rating systems, and somebody, if you are a client, then you can, recommend other customers.
Yeah.
Friends, obviously. Okay. Internet. Yep.
I mean,
I'm surprised how many are street. But
like,
remember, they also went out to the street to
right.
conduct the interviews, is my understanding, if I
Yeah.
remember that section completely. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that, like, so in that, where like the woman said, oh, and I don't want to mischaracterize how she said it.
Mhm.
She said, oh, what they do is they take your 10 to 16-year-old off, from the ice cream parlor, and they take them and they put them in sex slavery.
Mhm.
And like the reality is the vast majority of youth engaged in sex work, period, trafficked or not,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
The vast majority of them actually do not have someone controlling them like that.
Right.
Where you could say demanding 100% of your wages is fucking slavery.
I mean, you got to get to a certain point before you're like, wow, I really need someone else who is going to take a huge portion of my money to handle this. Like, you have to like run into something really bad, I think, on the streets in order to want that.
And yet another South Park. We talked about boy bands earlier.
No.
South Park, where Butters kisses a girl and then basically becomes a pimp.
Yep.
Was beautiful. And then the way they took that episode and that Butters and did was it the pandemic or the vaccine special? Did you see the vaccine special?
I did. I don't know what you're talking about.
When he was selling they were in the future, and adult Butters was selling NFTs. And like it was a perfect transference of Butters at the pimp convention to Butters selling NFTs to the workers at Denny's.
Oh, great.
God damn it, South Park is
don't
awesome.
buy NFTs. It's a scam.
He's like, they come in for some buttery pancakes or some hot crisp French fries, and you fuck with some NFTs.
God damn.
Anyway, let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up that pimp thing because I think a constant narrative in the right space, the right wing space, that's really kind of panicking about the human trafficking is that it's like incredibly exploitative. But remember, anybody under the age of 18 is considered traffic if they're engaged in sex work.
Right.
And of those, that group category up to 24, a very small number of them actually were in that kind of relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not what you think. It's not, the old movies with, the pimp with the cane and all that shit. It's mostly just people working for themselves.
And so this next clip's what, like a minute and a half?
Yeah, minute 31.
Okay, great. So now we're going to move into some other things that when folks say, oh, sound of freedom, and oh my God, so many kids are being trafficked and blah, 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 blah. These are the people they're not talking about. So we're going to start with an article about whistleblowers in the United States military actually being discharged or being punished for trying to raise alarms that Afghan commanders that were working with U.S. personnel were.
Well, that's not why he was punished.
Okay, right.
He wasn't punished for whistleblowing. He was punished for
beating the Afghan commander. This is one story. There were actually several others.
Yeah.
That they did, I think, they weren't able to re-enlist.
Okay.
Because they blew the whistle. They didn't beat anybody. But when they were told, don't fucking rock the boat, we have a relationship with these people. This is just normal. They fuck little boys. It's what they do. Yeah. And they said, that's bullshit. And they went around their commanders who said, just shut up. And they went to the fucking media.
Yeah.
And it created a huge headache for the military. Because then it's like, wait a second, the military knows these fucking...
It's condoning it? Yeah.
It's essentially condoning this. And it's like, they're not young boys. They're not teenagers. It's... And they're not sex workers. Like, they literally have, like, little boys as slaves that they rape. And it's fucked up. So here's just a quick clip on one of the the handful of soldiers that took matters into their own hands to let it be known that this was not okay.
Yeah. This would not pass the Prime Directive, by the way. You don't interfere in other people's cultures.
For the first time,
Not
we
your
are
place.
hearing directly from a decorated Green Beret who is being involuntarily separated from the U.S. Army for beating an Afghan police commander he calls a brutal child rapist. Last week, we told you about the case of Captain Dan Quinn and Sergeant First Class Charles Martland. Quinn left the Army on his own, but Martland is being essentially kicked out. Today, CNN obtained a statement from Martland in which the soldier says he had a moral obligation to act. In the statement provided originally to Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter, Martland writes, quote, "Kicking me out of the Army is morally wrong, and the entire country knows it. The alleged rapist whom he confronted is a U.S.-backed Afghan police commander who had allegedly tied a young boy to a bed and raped him repeatedly for up to 2 weeks, according to the boy and his mother, as well as according to other police commanders."
Yeah, maybe.
Captain Quinn was with Martland when they physically confronted the rapist to send him a message, they say.
Write that down.
Sadly, it was not the first time the soldiers had heard of this kind of abuse in this village, but they say they had previously been told by higher-ups in the Army that it was an Afghan matter and that there was nothing they could do about it. However, the local Afghan
that is
government,
honestly
the two
the
soldiers
answer,
say,
though.
was not willing to act.
Yeah, but
Charles and I just felt
I
compelled to
mean,
step
I could
in
also
and,
be like, I don't want to be attached
go
here.
around the
and
government
I
of
think that
Afghanistan and handle the situation ourselves.
Yeah.
In his statement obtained today, Martland
Um,
says, quote, "The severity
we
of the
can end
rapes and the
here.
lack of
I just
action
wanted
by
to
the
bring
Afghan
up the
government
fact
caused
that
many
the
of the
US
locals to view
government
our local
actively
police as worse."
knows about it and says our military, operational, or strategic objective is more important than this.
Well, also, it's not your country. So, I mean, you
But
don't enforce the
human
laws.
trafficking, there is the UN Convention of the Rights of Children.
Okay.
You do have international law, and we do have a generally accepted moral. I don't think the Taliban would have permitted that. I can't say for sure, but they probably would have cut the dude's dick off and crucified him or whatever fucking brutal punishment they dole out for that shit. Right. I'm sure it still happens, but I'm sure the Taliban would have punished it. I mean, they punished fucking everything.
Yeah.
Like relatively minor deviations from the faith were brutally punished.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure homosexual sex is probably just going to get punished by death.
Oh, execution for sure.
Yeah,
I am not positive. I don't want to put words in the Taliban's mouth, but but I think that's how it goes. At least that's what the media has told me, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to point out you can come back 94, and then cue the next. I did just want to point out that hey, like a U.S. government knows this is happening, and they can make decisions based on other objectives to not pursue justice or morally. They could have been like, okay, so it's not our thing, or we really don't want to kick this hornet's nest, but what we can do is elevate it to the UN. The UN can come and investigate it and prosecute. But they didn't. They said, shut the fuck up.
Right.
Shut up and color. Yeah. This doesn't concern you. And they're like, I watched this dude rape a 6-year-old. Like, that's not okay in any culture.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, you took matters into your own hands, so you got to go. And I kind of understand them kicking him out. I also would have appreciated just like when
you go further,
don't give him a bad conduct discharge. That'd be
other than honorable.
Anyway, or general discharge. Just allow him to keep at least the benefits that he would have had he left the military. Had he said, hey, guess what? I want to quit today. Yeah. And I'm going to go get a letter from my congressman to let me quit.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
When you look further into it too, like the mother of the boy had been like trying to get him back.
Oh, I didn't know
the
that.
entire time.
It makes sense. It's not voluntary.
No, not at all. It's not like she sold him or anything like that. No, he was taken and she was trying to get him back. Yeah.
And as we went through those first statistics, notice after domestic work for trafficking not involving sex, agricultural labor was the second highest category for non-sex trafficking.
There are so many children doing work like that, and like a lot of times it doesn't even start off with them doing it. It'll be their parents that are doing the work, and then like the parents can't get anyone to look after them. So they bring them with them, and then suddenly they're doing work.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're doing work in the field. Yeah.
It's really common to see 10, 11, 12-year-olds work in fields.
Yeah.
And I always tell my kids that when they're like, I'm bored. I'm like, oh yeah, because fucking
go work in the fucking
Jose and
field.
Juanita are fucking, you're the same age as you, and they've been fucking working in the field for years. Like, if you're that bored, I can find something for you to do.
I can find someone to traffic you to.
No. I'll just put them to work in the yard, right? Like,
yeah, true.
But anyway, so I did want to highlight that this is a very common way that trafficking is done, and you don't hear a lot of people being like, "I want to pay 4 times more for my chicken."
No, not at all.
How do you think you get cheap chicken?
Yeah, food is one of the biggest hot button issues, man. You change the price of anything by a little bit, and people fucking flip their
And
lids.
some of the price of chicken, I have no doubt, is coming from both plant shutdowns during COVID and also because of Trump's immigration policies, and they did a bunch of raids. So people are already starting to find out what food costs when you don't use slave labor.
That's true, yeah. Well, and then there's also, greed
pound.
is an aspect of it. Like, some of the chickens died from avian flu, but like the percentage of chickens that died was not reflected in the percent increase cost of chicken or eggs or whatever. I think it was eggs. That was not reflected. The price went up much more than the amount that was lost. And so it was just taking advantage of panic. Neither here nor there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's watch this short clip on agricultural trafficking.
One day I received a phone call. There was a gentleman that had a nephew that had been smuggled into the country from Guatemala and was being kept to work against his will in Ohio. And within 24 hours, I had a conference call from the head of the FBI, HSI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in that region.
2 months later, federal and local law enforcement moved in.
A human trafficking bust at an egg farm in Maryland.
In the early morning hours, they raided the trailer park where the teens had been living.
Federal prosecutors call it modern-day slavery.
Their paychecks kept by their traffickers.
They detained approximately 45 people.
The human trafficking operation was run by a third-party contractor hired by Trillium Farms.
At least 10, they determined, were victims of trafficking, including 8 minors.
And the U.S. Attorney's Office says its investigation is ongoing.
Yep.
I mean, how could that possibly happen?
I'll tell you.
The more we learned about it, the more it became apparent that there was a connection back to our immigration policies and how the Department of Health and Human Services deals with kids who come here unaccompanied. What makes this Marion case even more alarming is that a U.S. government agency was actually responsible for delivering some of the victims into the hands of the abusers. How could the federal government take these kids in, try to protect them, and then as they send them out to families, pending a court date, give them right back to the people who had brought them up here?
Yeah.
So basically, our shitty policy creates the space for this exploitation to take place, and there's economic incentives for this exploitation to take place. Exactly. And on and on and on.
And more, or once again, it's a business. It is incredibly organized. It is very professional. They've got their scripts. We didn't cover it, but basically, oh, you're not doing your thing. Okay, we're going to kill your family back in Guatemala.
Yeah.
So get back to work.
Yeah, and I think that there's kind of like, this is the kind of stuff, or you think of the Immoki workers movement in Florida, where they did a bunch of labor organizing. I think that's what it was called. Mm-hmm. And then they wound up like pressuring fast food chains to just pay more because they weren't ever going to get the farmers to do it. So they got the fast food companies to agree to pay more, and a portion of that went back to workers or something. And so they voluntarily raised their prices. And I think for a while they're like, hey, due to the tomato shortages, like, you have to ask for tomato. We're not just going to put it on your burrito supreme or whatever.
Right.
And that was all around the same time. They were just like, and they do that in California too. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh no, they get paid. It's like, but you're paying them per unit, and you're paying them such a small amount per unit that unless they fucking like use the shit out of their body,
Mm-hmm.
they can't walk out of there with a decent wage. And then that's not to mention the fact that a lot of migrant laborers, especially in industries or in regions where like there's like a couple main commodity crops that all get harvested at the same time, so it doesn't make sense to live there all year, right? Some farming communities like Salinas Valley has a lot of like, you know, resident farm workers because they turn those crops over so fast.
Right.
Like lettuce only takes a few fucking 6 weeks, 8 weeks to grow, right? Like
Right.
It's pretty quick. At any rate, and the way you pace your fields too, right? You're constantly rotating. So if you're not harvesting, you're fucking planting or whatever.
Right. There's always work.
There's always work, yeah. But something like, you know, what we do here, a lot of it's mechanical for the nut crops and stuff. But any of the soft fruits down south that are largely hand picked, you know, it's seasonal labor. And so they have what's called a seasonal worker housing. And if you go into California housing policy and what constitutes appropriate housing versus what they would call substandard housing, there is no such rule. So agricultural workers don't have the same housing standards.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have access to clean water because many of these agricultural communities like have poisoned the groundwater with like excess agricultural toxins. So
or even just over extracted.
Or over extraction, but a lot of it is poisoned by pesticide runoff. And so they're like, we can't drink the water. So like they get paid very little. They have to work really fucking hard for it. And then they have to spend money out of their pocket that goes back to the farmer for staying in a fucking halfway rotted trailer with rats.
Right.
And then they have to go to the grocery store and buy fucking water because they can't drink the water there.
Right.
And so like it's, for all intents and purposes, it's barely better than it's sharecropping essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not.
It's alive and well.
It's technically not chattel slavery, but it's not a whole lot fucking better.
Well, I mean, like, I think that we tend to think of farmers and we think like, oh yeah, you know, what's the name of the guy, the senator in Sacramento, LaMalfa, you know, where he's like, I got a family farm. And it's like you got like 200 acres split between yourself and all your kids, right?
Yeah.
But you know, so many of the people that are in farming are, like you're saying, they're basically sharecroppers, and these are the people that are hiring the migrant laborers. They're barely making it.
They own the equipment and all of that, and then they farm out, for lack of a better term. They hire labor to do all the fucking grueling bullshit.
Oh, and I'm even thinking of the ones. I'm even thinking of the ones where it's like they don't own the land. They don't own any of the stuff. They're buying it from. Gotcha.
People working the land don't own it. The Doug LaMalfas of the world own the land. They're not actually farmers. They're landowners.
Right.
And the people that are farming it don't get paid almost anything.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, people in agriculture get paid fairly well, but there is a mountain of exploited labor on which the edifice of industrial agriculture is built.
And a lot of it is in chickens. Yes, you can buy chickens, but you can only buy them from us, and you got to buy the feed from us, and you got to buy blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and those are U.S. citizen farmers. Yeah. But yeah, John Oliver did a couple great pieces about chickens.
Yeah.
And chicken farmers and how the industry just exploits the fucking farmers by controlling a choke point at the slaughterhouse.
Exactly, yeah.
And getting to set prices. Yeah, it's fucked up. So then we're going into one more case of trafficking that I just thought was kind of interesting and probably superfluous given we're so over time. Let's watch it anyway.
Yeah, it's not. What you're thinking.
It doesn't matter if you're a kid, if you're an adult, or even if you're dead. You can be trafficked.
You can and will be trafficked.
Org manager trafficked human remains on the black market. Telemundo's Grace Gomez has the story.
My parents were law enforcement. My father was a deputy sheriff, and my mother was a police officer.
Paula Poltanovich says her parents, Joan and Nicholas, were known in their community for the way they helped those in need. And even after death, they wanted to donate their bodies to medical research.
They've always wanted to donate back to science to help the students to find and cure diseases.
She says she was shocked to find out someone had possibly tampered with her father's remains.
Never in my life would expect this to happen.
What do you have to say about these charges? Last month, Cedric Lodge, the former Harvard Medical School's morgue manager, was arrested. He and his wife, Denise Lodge, are facing criminal charges after an FBI investigation into the trafficking of more than 400 human remains. According to court documents from 2018 to 2022, Lodge allegedly stole body parts, brought them to his home, and sold them to buyers in other states. NBC News reached out to the Lodge's lawyer, but they didn't respond to our request for comment. According to the FBI, 6 additional people from Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Arkansas are connected and currently face charges on this case. Last week,
Yeah, not what you were thinking, I bet.
No, I did want to point that out because there is also a trade in organs.
Yeah.
It is not super common that people get kidnapped and have their organs harvested, but it's not also never happens.
Yeah.
It does happen from time to time, but I thought that that was really interesting because there is a high demand. And again, who is receiving that organ that is trafficked?
Right. Someone rich.
Generally the affluent.
Yeah, someone who can
right?
afford $60,000 for a kidney or whatever.
So trafficking is just another way of saying the rich exploiting the masses. And that's why I think the definition in a lot of cases is so loose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's almost to this point, the more hysteria that builds around it, the less meaning it has.
Yeah, and that's the problem
me.
is it. Yeah, and that's what worries me is like, you know, with things like Pizzagate or worrying about your little white daughter and stuff like that, you're drawing attention away from the real victims and making it harder to help them who actually need it. And so it's like maybe we need to not have this moral panic about it and focus on the people that are actually most at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's horrible, but I also want to point out 6 charged with trafficking in human remains. There are museums around the world that have not, many museums that have not repatriated fucking indigenous skeletal remains or artifacts or whatever. Right. And so like literally
John Oliver had a good one on that too.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah, he was basically like, there were interviews and like one of the people interviewed like literally said that you couldn't trust the stuff they had with the people in the country that they took it from, because it's like, oh well, there's social upheaval and it might get stolen and sold and blah blah blah. And so it's better here. Basically, it's better here in Britain in our museum than it would be to give it back to the people in Africa that we stole it from.
Yeah. And so the museums of Europe and the Americas are full of trafficked stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Stolen stuff they didn't have permission to take, you know, from exploited peoples, etc., so forth. Yeah. And also we didn't even, I failed to, it was on my mind, but we already had so much stuff to cover here.
So much stuff.
But the missing and murdered indigenous women and trafficking in indigenous women.
Yep, which is barely even tracked.
Do you notice that? Like, where was Native American on there?
Nowhere.
Clearly, because maybe there's not indigenous people in their survey areas. And I'm not going to say that's a fault of the people conducting the survey. I think this kind of like youth in the sex trade is a fantastic fucking document for shedding light to allow people to use their own fucking reason and critical thinking skills to make their own mind up about this issue.
Right.
And it sucks that their sample areas didn't include indigenous women. I did not read every word of that report. They may have had a section on the prevalence of that drew from elsewhere, and there's other data on that. But it's really common, and I think in most cases it's very similar. It's either poor young women, either teenagers or young adults who need money, and there's all this oil money, and so they're engaging in the sex trade with men who then beat and or kill them, or kidnap them, and the like. Because generally these women are disappearing out of their own communities. They're not getting, they're not being found other places. So that is another thing that fits within this trafficking. The trafficking that is real is missing and murdered indigenous women, not Sally from the 4-H club at the local junior high school getting picked up from the grocery store when she's selling Girl Scout cookies. Like that's not fucking happening.
Right.
But it is happening to children, to young boys, young girls, and also adult men and women and non-binary, etc., so forth.
Yeah. Humans.
So anyway, you
I have
highlighted a few items that
one
you
that I
wanted
wanted to
talk
cover.
about. Go ahead.
Mostly this second one here. This
So
is
real quick, just summarize FOSTA and SESTA.
So FOSTA and SESTA were acts that were put into place to basically stop sex trafficking online. It had the since anyone selling sex was classified as being trafficked, regardless of whether it was voluntary or not, it affected a whole lot of people who were in legitimate sex work. And unfortunately, the person who I have highlighted here, she was trafficked at the age of 12. And understandably views sex work period as not being consensual, because it can't be. And I think it's great how close she got to a criticism of capitalism without making that last step, because she says she acknowledged that the choice can be a tricky thing when it comes to the sex trade, which she calls an oppressive system that thrives off of other oppressive systems such as misogyny, patriarchy, and capitalism. When you recognize prostitution as a system that thrives on those other systems, you can see how prostitution can never be an individual choice.
Yep.
Nothing in capitalism can be an individual choice. It is coercion to its core. You do not work, you die.
Yep. You die early.
Yeah. And so it's great that she recognized that. But I wish she made that one little step further and just been like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
In general, we're in a very coercive system.
And that second piece, or first piece rather, that you highlighted, the majority, over 98% of individuals who engage in prostitution are vulnerable people already, which is kind of the moral, the thread that ties all this together.
Everything
is that the people being exploited are already vulnerable to exploitation.
Yeah.
From the beginning, due to other factors. So rather than making it difficult for sex workers to engage in their economic activity, we make it more difficult and we force them back into the arms of their pimps.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if there's any lesson to be learned here, it's love your children, tell them how much worth they have, and you'll have to worry a lot less about them being trafficked.
And also a good one that I've considered: trust your gut. If he seems like he's a shitbag, he's probably a shitbag.
Right. You were a shitbag once. You know what other shitbags look like.
I know what it's like to be a shitbag. I never said the things that people wanted to hear. I was never that guy. I'm never going to sweet talk. Like the most sweet talking I ever got was like, "Ooh, those are nice earrings.
Ooh, baby, you're the prettiest girl in this room."
Yeah, you're exactly. You're
the whole
you're
damn
definitely in the top 3. Isn't that a Flight of the Conchords song?
Yeah.
It's like, you're not the hottest girl in the room, but you're definitely in the top 3.
You could be a part-time model. You should probably keep your day job.
I love that shit, dude.
Oh,
all right, and so we're coming full circle, right? So Joe Rogan brought up a headline: U.S. Marshals rescued 72 missing children across Indiana, Ohio, Georgia in the past several weeks. And I just wanted to skim this article. We're a little over hour and a half. I thought did a very good job getting through a lot of really dense shit.
Yeah.
And so let's just take a few more minutes to kind of full circle on this. Again, encouraging everybody to go into the show notes, look at that report, read it word for word if you feel like it, or at least do what we did, go through the data so that when people say, when the next time some fucking Karen or Sally is at the school board meeting saying how if you have somebody dressed in drag reading to your kids that they're going to fucking kidnap your kids and put them in sex slavery, you can be like, actually, there is zero data to support your fucking, your accusation.
You're more likely to be the one trafficking your child than the drag queen.
You're more likely to be trafficking the fucking woman who scrubs your toilets.
Give her back her passport.
Give her back her passport, Karen, Sally. All right, moving on. So there's a number of these that all happened. This was a couple years back, by the way. I believe, right? It was like 2020.
Yep, 2020.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, great. So this was a number of years ago. And I just wanted to scroll down because they talk a lot about this. They're just like, oh, we found all these dozens of kids, 17. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Considered to be some of the most at-risk and challenging recovery cases in the area based on indications of high-risk factors such as victimization of child sex trafficking, child exploitation, sex abuse, physical abuse, and medical or mental health conditions. The statement continued. So this is a statement from law enforcement, I believe.
Right.
So scroll a little further down. Here you go. We want to help them. The message we wish to convey is the missing children, their families, that we use every resource at our disposal to find you. So one of the things I wanted to draw attention in this article is that there's quite a bit of sensationalism involved. Oh my God, all these sex trafficking. And then when you get down after paragraph, and you start to actually hear examples of these cases, you're like, wait a second, that doesn't sound as sensational as you made it sound in the first few paragraphs. If you scroll just a little bit lower, you'll find, they've been abused and neglected, which is true. Some involve human trafficking, not 72.
Not 72. Some
Some we found in here, blah, blah, blah. We're trying. A number of them had gone to the hospital after we recovered them, of course, just to get them checked out. There is one where it says they had one arrest a little bit lower.
Not forgot. Operation Not Forgotten.
We might have skipped that, but it was like one was arrested for violating custody orders from the court. He's his own kids. He's not technically trafficking in this stole Sally from the fucking bake sale bullshit.
Right.
But like literally took his own kids, which was technically illegal, but
custodial
interference. There you go.
Yeah.
And so they list that. So the arrest of 9 people for alleged crimes. I didn't have the opportunity to follow up and see how many actually had charges pressed, because that is the big indication. How many charges were pressed, and how many were prosecuted.
Right.
Because a newspaper can be like, oh, these people were arrested with these allegations. Whether there's enough evidence, they can be arrested with no evidence at all. Basically.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
and the newspaper might never follow
people for parental kidnapping, registered sex offender violations, drugs and weapons possession, custodial interference, and crimes related to sex trafficking. So, like, they could have gone to check on the kids, and the father had fucking weed in one of the states, like Georgia, where weed's illegal. I think weed's illegal in Georgia. Right? Probably. So he could have had fucking weed, and he would be counted as one of the 9 people arrested. But that's not related to him trafficking fucking children for exploitation. That he just had fucking weed.
Yeah.
Or say he was a parolee and he had something that he wasn't supposed to have. And the whole reason he took his kids is because the ex-wife is like, that guy's a fucking dirtbag. He's, a felon or whatever. And he's out on parole and just wants to fucking see his kids. We don't get the story. We're getting the sensationalized version here.
Yeah. And then you finally get some real numbers here. Well, and the thing is, like, the newspaper typically doesn't follow up. They'll do a retraction if something is proven to be just blatantly wrong. But it's on, like,
hide them, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's on like page 7 of section C or whatever. It's been a while since I read a newspaper.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And they often don't, because there's a lot of stuff that, like, the Columbia Journalism Review came out with this scathing report on Russiagate, and how, like, the mainstream media and all the major papers and major TV stations fucking completely fabricated it and lied to people and all this, and like, you can go and find no one's retracted any of those fucking stories.
Yeah.
MSNBC didn't,
and the damage is done. So what does it matter?
Yeah. Where Rachel Maddow was saying Russia was going to fucking hack power plants in Vermont and cause people to freeze to death.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking absurd on its face. They never retracted. So, things here could be inaccurate, and they never retract it because they know that this stuff drives clicks because there's a moral panic. Right. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, but when you dig into it, here's like, if we can save just one life, right, then it's worth it to have this massive law enforcement apparatus that crosses multiple states.
Right.
And I'm the kind of person that's like, I don't think saving several thousand people from fucking, minor diseases that occasionally cause problems in a very small number of people. I don't think mass vaccination for those kind of relatively minor illnesses is the right course of action to take when so few actually have bad cases, right? If whatever disease that's fairly common and fairly innocuous is only really, really bad for a few thousand people out of millions and millions and millions, I'm like, is it really the right thing to do to compel millions and millions of people to do something to protect you? Again, is that freedom? Like, and I'm not saying like selfish freedom, but I'm just saying like it should be a conversation that we're at least willing to have.
Right.
Like at what point, because we can't make everything safe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, airbags kill people. If you want to take airbags out of cars because there's a handful of people.
I mean, we have those little spinny things at the playgrounds. You don't have those anymore because a few kids got stuck in them and died or got maimed or whatever. And it's like, I'm willing to accept a few maimed children if I can have
for
fun.
A spinny guy.
Yeah, little spinny guy.
Yeah, so that said 15 out of those 72 were allegedly sex trafficked, according to the newspaper.
Yep. Allegedly. They hadn't even gotten it, down pat. And yeah, so 15 out of 72.
So 72 sounds like a big number, and then you start reading and you're like, oh, wait. Some had been missing anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years. Some of them were reluctant to leave the homes where they were found, which officials said, I really like this, which officials said often happens with children and teens who are repeatedly subjected to sexual abuse.
You want a good number? 99 people die every day in car accidents nationwide.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're worried about 72, you should be worried about that.
We're going to expand the security state with speed traffic cameras to prevent those people from dying, when the reality is that they wouldn't be dying if we didn't build our entire human habitat around moving ourselves miles and miles and miles at fast speeds to do basic everyday functions.
But that is traffic of a different kind.
That's the traffic without the K. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting because they're like, some of them were reluctant to leave the homes, and they're like, oh, of course they are, because they're abused. And you're like, well, no, I know lots of people who are like, they're like, come home with me, and they're like, no, like I like fucking living at dad's house, or I like living at mom's house. I don't want to go with you. I don't like it when I'm with you. But they're just like automatically like, that's not what this is. They're refusing to leave, not because they like where they are, but because they're being abused. It's what is that logical fallacy? It's like begging the question, right? Like, I think it's the one I'm thinking of. You're just kind of like it's like everything fits your already like determined conclusion.
Right. Yeah.
They've been sex trafficked. Of course they don't want to leave because they've been sex trafficked, right?
Yeah. They got fucking Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, interesting. 91% are considered endangered runaways. I'm sorry, but a young person with very little life experience, if they're outside of what little...
They're endangered.
They're endangered by definition.
They're in danger. Good God. Get them back home.
And there's, again, that 1/6 are likely to become sex trafficking victims. And I'm not saying, I'm okay with the word victim used, as that other, in that article you pulled up, with that sex worker saying like, there's not really a way to do sex work without exploitation.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I would say they're victims, but I would say that anybody that young, as the data showed, 70-something% are Black females or Black. And then like the vast majority of them are females. Solid majority, almost half have children. I think it was like 38 or 40% have children and begin sex work at 17. So they're teen moms who are fucking hustling to do what they have to do. And they are victims, not because they're engaged in sex work. They are victims because they have no other fucking options.
Yeah, precisely that.
And so we come full circle to the reality is that, yes, this does happen, but it's generally built on the precondition of a capitalist economy that is in and of itself exploitative. Whatever.
Second one.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we did the best we could. Again, go to the show notes, cue the music. Cue the funk music because it's totally not out of place. But it goes with the dancing Baby Yoda, so let's roll with it.
I turned up the volume this time.
We actually got this done in about an hour and 45? That's
hour 45,
not bad considering we had a fucking boatload to chew off. And we've been really good at keeping these down to about an hour, right? And I think we've done a good job, but I think this warranted a little bit more time. One of the things I thought I saw in that article, and maybe I was confusing it with a different article, was that one of the arrests was like a father who violated court order. So it's like not, the kids aren't necessarily being exploited. There's a lot of ways that this article can sensationalize just normal everyday shit that happens. And I'm not saying that's okay, right? Parents that take their child without permission of the court or whatever, if they have a bad relationship with the other parent, like that, it doesn't make it right, but it also doesn't make it the same thing that those women were concerned about at the school board meeting.
Right.
Or the way that Joe Rogan's like, oh my God, all this human trafficking. And you read the literal article that he was referring to, and you're like, oh, wait a second. Like, so they're not even positive that they're engaged in the sex trade, and they only think that 15 out of those 72 were.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a far cry from this being like such a fucking widespread problem that we have to like obsess about it, and every state needs to make a law, and the federal government needs to keep piling laws, and we need more surveillance. We need access to all your internet records so that we can make sure you're not sex trafficking. Like, and I'm just always going to come from that position where like I'm concerned about the police state, because I see how close we are to fucking like bona fide fascism in America, and I don't want to build the tools of oppression only to have them handed over to fascists when economic conditions get to the point where Americans back a fascist movement en masse, more so than, you know, the kind of light fascist light of Trumpism, right? Like a legitimate fascism. I don't want the tools of oppression to be in place for when that moment inevitably comes, because I think it is inevitable. But anyway, we talked about a lot of things today. We tried to provide you the data you need to make a decision for how you approach this issue with your own family and how you think about this issue. We're always encouraging folks to not engage in moral panic. If something seems really fucked up, maybe do some digging and try and find out if it's really as fucked up as they're telling you it is.
Right.
Because there's a high degree of, what do you call that? Where you magic, where you're trying to wave the hand here so that they miss that you're fucking...
Oh, sleight of hand, yeah.
Sleight of hand, thank you. That's it. Yeah, because it could be just a propagandistic sleight of hand. They're trying to get you to ignore, you know, some kind of trade deal, or the fact that like U.S. representatives went to the BRICS conference when the U.S. isn't part of BRICS to basically, I don't know exactly what happened, but I have a feeling there was some strong arming into them not creating their own currency. I wouldn't doubt if we start overthrowing elected leaders of the BRICS countries that we can, like Brazil and Italy or whatever.
South Africa,
yeah. Wait, not Italy, India. And there's a lot of people who want to become BRICS, so we could also, you know, Trojan horse, like overthrow someone, put a puppet, and then have them join BRICS, only to be like the guy at the meeting that just wants to argue process the whole time so nothing gets done. Clearly, I've been in leftist organizing spaces. At any rate, here at With Thunderous Applause do believe that human trafficking is real. We do believe it's a problem. We also believe that too much attention is paid to little white girls, not enough attention is paid to black women, who are the vast majority, as our data showed, or missing and murdered indigenous women, or exploited agricultural and domestic workers, predominantly probably from Latin America or the Caribbean, and various other forms of exploitation, including the trafficking of human organs. I just like the case of the body snatchers.
Yeah.
At any rate, and so we hope that we provided enough data to inspire you to go in the show notes, read through some of that stuff, go seek out your own information, seek it out from sources that multiple sources. Don't get too caught up on the ones that are sensationalizing. Don't get pulled into the rabbit hole. Don't go barging into pizza parlors with a weapon and demanding to see the sex dungeons. Like, just take a deep breath. This shit has happened. As long as we have a system that exploits nature and exploits other human beings, this will always be a problem. So if you want to eradicate human trafficking, let's abolish capitalism. And with that, remember, folks, when liberty dies, it dies
with thunderous applause.
Baby Yoda.